On the afternoon of December 14th, 2025, inside a quiet estate in Brentwood, a place where California sunlight usually falls only on faces shaped by success and serenity, police discovered two lifeless bodies lying in silence behind closed doors. No screams, no signs of public chaos, only a stillness so deep it sent a chill through the air. The man was Rob Reiner, a director who spent his entire life telling us stories about friendship, love, childhood memories, truth, and conscience. The woman beside him was Michele Reiner, his devoted life partner, a quiet presence behind years of humanitarian work and an unwavering belief in goodness. Hollywood was shaken. The public stood frozen in disbelief. And a question began to echo, not only for investigators, but for all of us. How does a man who devoted his life to stories of hope and humanity come to an ending so deeply shadowed by darkness? This is not merely the story of a death. This is a journey moving backward from the glare of the spotlight to look at the real human being behind the legend, at the silences cinema never spoke of, and at the emotional legacy Rob Reiner left behind, even when he is no longer here to say goodbye. This is the story of Rob Reiner, and this is the final chapter no one ever saw coming. Rob Reiner was born on March the 6th, 1947, in New York, into a home where laughter filled the air as naturally as breathing. His father, Carl Reiner, was one of the greatest comedic minds America has ever known. To the public, that was a privilege. But to a child, it was also an enormous shadow. Rob grew up surrounded by scripts, studio rooms, and endless conversations about the rhythm of dialogue. Yet instead of being swept away by the glow of fame, the young boy came to understand something deeper. Laughter only truly matters when it reaches another human being. Not attention, not applause, but the feeling of being understood. Rob's childhood was never marked by material lack, but it was shaped by an invisible discipline, the pressure to discover his own voice rather than live inside the echo of his father's. He did not want to be Carl Reiner's son. He wanted to become an independent storyteller. From this, a defining trait took shape early on. Rob Reiner listened more than he spoke. He observed more than he revealed. He was drawn to ordinary people, everyday relationships, and small moments that linger long after they pass. Perhaps that is why, even at a very young age, Reiner never dreamed of heroes or untouchable icons. He cared about people who were growing, falling in love, experiencing loss, and struggling to understand themselves. In a family where comedy was a profession, Rob Reiner learned the most important lesson of his life early on. Cinema is not meant to impress. Cinema is meant to stay. And from those roots, a very different kind of Hollywood storytelling quietly began. In the early years of the 1970s, Rob Reiner entered Hollywood through the most familiar doorway, in front of the camera. His role as Michael "Meathead" Stevich in the hit sitcom All in the Family quickly made him a recognizable face on American television. The character, outspoken, blunt, sometimes stubborn, perfectly reflected the spirit of a generation questioning old values and inherited truths. Success arrived swiftly. 2 Emmy Awards, steady fame, and a position many could only dream of. Yet behind the studio lights, an unspoken restlessness began to stir inside Rob Reiner. He realized he was not truly drawn to being the center of the frame. What kept him awake at night was the rhythm of dialogue, the way one scene flowed into the next, and the emotion that lingered long after the screen went dark. While audiences knew him as a comedic actor, Reiner had already begun to see the world through the eyes of a storyteller. Quietly, he studied directing. He learned how to shape atmosphere, how to build moments, how to let a story breathe without forcing attention. The decision to change direction was anything but easy. Walking away from a successful role meant giving up security, and the expectations of those who believed he should remain exactly where he was. But Reiner understood one simple truth. If he stayed, he would be living inside a costume that was never meant for him. So when All in the Family came to an end, Rob Reiner closed the first chapter of his acting career and opened a new journey. One less glamorous, far riskier, but deeply honest to who he was. He did not leave Hollywood. He simply stepped behind the camera. And it was in that quiet step back that Rob Reiner's true fire finally began to burn. In the mid-1980s, while many Hollywood directors were chasing spectacle and ego, Rob Reiner chose the opposite path. He placed the camera lower, listened to his characters more closely, and allowed the story itself to lead the way. The first film to prove this was Stand By Me. No heroes, no grand victories. Just four boys walking along a railroad track, carrying fear, innocence, and a sense of loss they couldn't yet name. The film struck directly at America's collective memory, and for the first time, Hollywood understood. Reiner didn't make films to shock. He made films to stay. Then came The Princess Bride, a fairy tale that seemed simple on the surface, yet told with gentle irony, sincere love, and a belief that imagination still has a place in the adult world. The film didn't merely survive the passage of time, it became a ritual of revisiting for generations. The next peak was When Harry Met Sally. Rob Reiner didn't invent love. He simply dared to ask the question everyone was afraid to ask. Can men and women truly be friends? Those seemingly ordinary conversations reshaped the romantic comedy genre entirely, because they sounded real, too real. Then, unexpectedly, Reiner stepped into darkness with Misery. No romance, no nostalgia, only pure obsession. Kathy Bates emerged from the film holding an Academy Award, and critics realized that Rob Reiner was not confined by genre. He understood human beings in every state of being. A Few Good Men became the exclamation point of that extraordinary run. A courtroom drama where dialogue turned into weapons, where truth was not always easy to accept. You can't handle the truth was more than a line. It was a cinematic declaration. In less than a decade, Rob Reiner created classic films across multiple genres. This was not the result of luck. It came from a very personal mechanism. Reiner always began with people, not plot. He believed that if characters were real enough, audiences would follow them anywhere, even into places where the light no longer reaches. And it was precisely when Rob Reiner stood at the highest point of his glory that the first cracks quietly began to form, unseen by everyone. At the height of his career, Rob Reiner seemed to have everything: fame, the respect of his peers, and a family life kept quietly out of the public eye. Yet it was within that silence that unseen storms began to form. Not dramatic, not headline-grabbing, but slowly eroding from within. Rob Reiner always drew a clear line between cinema and private life. He rarely spoke about his family in the media, not out of avoidance, but out of a belief that the most important things do not need to be proven before a crowd. To him, family was a refuge from Hollywood, not a part of it. Michele Reiner, his longtime partner, never stepped into the spotlight. She was a photographer, a producer, and a companion who shared with Rob a different world altogether: social causes, humanitarian work, the protection of children, the environment, and the LGBTQ+ community. They did not present themselves as a power couple, but as two individuals choosing to live responsibly by the values they believed in. But privacy carries another side as well. When the lights go out, when the film ends, when the applause fades, Rob Reiner was left facing a question that many storytellers eventually confront. Do I still matter when I am no longer at the center? In later years, as his directing career no longer produced the same defining milestones, Reiner gradually stepped back from Hollywood's relentless pace, not as a failure, but as a deliberate retreat. Yet that retreat also meant more time alone. Time to face himself and the empty spaces that fame had once concealed. There were no major scandals, no public breakdowns, just a quiet life where questions lingered longer than answers. Perhaps that is why, when tragedy finally came, the public was all the more stunned, because in the collective imagination, Rob Reiner had chosen a peaceful ending. But behind the closed doors of a private household, we never truly knew what was unfolding. And then, that unseen storm, unheard, unseen, led to a night Hollywood would never forget. On the afternoon of December 14, 2025, in the quiet Brentwood neighborhood of Los Angeles, a call requesting medical assistance was placed to local authorities. When emergency responders and police arrived at the scene, Rob Reiner and his wife, Michele Reiner, were found with no signs of life. No cries for help were reported. No visible chaos greeted first responders. Only an unnatural, heavy silence. The Los Angeles Police Department confirmed that the case was being handled as a serious homicide investigation. Initial reports indicated signs of stabbing on the bodies, but authorities declined to release details regarding the weapon or the specific sequence of events, pending an official conclusion from the medical examiner's office. No arrests had been made at that time. The news spread rapidly. Hollywood was shaken, not because a star had fallen in the public eye, but because of the sudden disappearance of a man who had long chosen a quiet life. Rob Reiner had not walked red carpets in recent years. He did not seek attention, and perhaps for that very reason, this moment felt all the more unreal. The Reiner family issued a brief statement requesting privacy during their time of grief. No explanations, no further comment. Just a clear boundary drawn between personal loss and public curiosity. What continues to trouble so many people is not the details yet to be revealed, but the cruel contrast itself. A man who devoted his life to telling stories of friendship, love, truth, and conscience, leaving this world under circumstances that offer no answers. There was no cinematic ending, no farewell. For Rob Reiner, the lights went out without warning. And when a story ends so abruptly, what remains is not the question of what happened, but how we will remember him, while the final details still remain beyond our reach. After the news was confirmed, Hollywood fell into a rare moment of stillness. Not the familiar noise of hurried tributes, but a heavy silence, as if the entire industry was struggling to comprehend what had just happened. A storyteller of the collective memory had departed, in a way no one was emotionally prepared to receive. Colleagues who had worked with Rob Reiner spoke of him in the same tone, calm, kind, and always placing people before fame. There were no shocking anecdotes, only the quiet sense of loss felt by those who had been listened to, trusted, in editing rooms, on film sets, and in conversations after the cameras stopped rolling. For the public, the grief took a different shape. People did not mourn only a director. They mourned the pieces of memory bound to his films. Stand By Me was no longer just a childhood movie. When Harry Met Sally, it was no longer just a love story. They became personal fragments, revisited with a different emotion, slower, heavier, and more reflective. The Reiner family chose to face their loss in silence. No appearances, no debates, no explanations. This was not avoidance, but a conscious decision to allow grief to remain grief, not become the next news cycle. In the days that followed, the question, what happened, gradually gave way to another, quieter but deeper. What do we learn from a life that placed humanity at its center? Rob Reiner left behind no loud manifestos. He left behind a way of working, a way of listening, and a belief that storytelling, when honest enough, can heal. Some scars never disappear, but some legacies teach those who remain how to move forward. For Rob Reiner, the path to healing does not lie in answering every question. It lies in keeping his stories alive, so that silence is not the final word. Rob Reiner is no longer here to appear before the camera, to give interviews, or to explain what happened. Yet in a strange way, his presence feels stronger than ever, not through images, but through memory. After his passing, his films began to be revisited, quietly, without spectacle, without promotional campaigns, just late-night screenings, rewinding familiar scenes, lines of dialogue once overlooked now carrying a different weight. People began to realize that Rob Reiner never made films about endings. He made films about the space in between, where human beings are still trying to understand one another. Stand By Me became a reminder of a childhood that can never be reclaimed. When Harry Met Sally was no longer just a love story, but a meditation on time, choice, and waiting. A Few Good Men echoed like a delayed challenge about truth and the cost of postponing it. This was not rebirth in the conventional sense. Rob Reiner did not return with a new work. He returned through the continued life of his existing films, as they were reinterpreted, rediscovered, and found new audiences who had never grown up in his era. Some choose to leave the stage while the lights are still on. Some leave when the lights have already gone out. And some, like Rob Reiner, truly depart Hollywood only when their stories are strong enough to walk on their own. This rebirth was not loud. It unfolded in silence, in memory, and in the quiet understanding that some films and some people do not need to be present to continue existing. For Rob Reiner, perhaps this is the truest form of rebirth. Not returning to be seen, but to be remembered. Rob Reiner did not leave Hollywood with loud revolutions. He never attached his name to a flashy movement or a showy technique. What he left behind was something far harder to define, a belief that cinema, above all else, is about people. In Hollywood history, few directors have traveled across so many genres while maintaining such a consistent narrative voice. From the untamed childhood of Stand By Me to the mature love of When Harry Met Sally, the psychological fear of misery, and the heavy moral questions of A Few Good Men, all revolve around a single axis: how human beings respond when confronted with their own truth. Reiner never imposed messages. He created space for characters to speak, to fall silent, to contradict themselves. That patience shaped generations of filmmakers who came after him, those who understood that a well-timed line of dialogue can carry more power than any spectacle. For audiences, Rob Reiner's legacy is deeply personal. Each person remembers him differently. A film watched with childhood friends, a line of dialogue revisited in moments of loneliness, a sudden realization that time has passed and we have grown. These memories do not live in film archives. They live in everyday life. And perhaps that is Rob Reiner's true place in history. Not on the highest pedestal of honors, but at the intersection between cinema and personal memory, where films stop being entertainment and become part of the human journey. This legacy is not loud. It does not demand constant recognition. Yet it endures, like stories told with enough honesty that they never truly disappear. Some people leave this world with a thunderous echo, and some depart in silence, leaving behind stories that learn to speak for them. Rob Reiner belonged to the latter. He never needed a grand farewell, because every time a viewer presses play on Stand By Me, every time a line from When Harry Met Sally is spoken again, or every time truth rings out in A Few Good Men, Rob Reiner is still there. Not as a distant legend, but as a storyteller sitting very close to us. His ending leaves many with a sense of unease. But perhaps what truly matters is not how a story concludes, but how long it walks beside us on our journey through life. Rob Reiner spent his entire life reminding us that human beings are complex, fragile, and worthy of being heard. And now, as the lights have gone out, the story is handed to those who remain. Which Rob Reiner film touched you the most, and why? A line of dialogue, a single moment, or a memory tied to your own life? Share your thoughts in the comments. And if you believe that gentle, human stories still deserve to be told, subscribe to Fame Legends, so together we can keep these memories alive. Because some people may leave, but their stories never truly end.